content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, sensitive topics, and explicit language that may be triggering, offensive, or sensitive subjects to some viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised. The purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss true crime cases for entertainment and educational purposes only. This podcast does not intend to glorify or sensationalize crime, but rather aims to analyze and understand the complexities of human behavior in the criminal justice system. We encourage listeners to approach this content with empathy, critical thinking, respect for the victims and their families. Let's explore the darkest corners of human nature and the stories that send shivers down your spine. Tonight, we're diving into a book that peels back the layers of a killer's mind with chilling precision. With my guest, Douglas Fifer, the author of 50 Shades of True Crime, Sex, Drugs, and a Killer Kink, takes you on a dark and twisty ride through the psyche of a murderer, revealing the disturbing motives behind the heinous acts. So pour yourself a glass of something bold and let's unravel the sinister secrets and this unforgettable true crime cases like Israel Keys and Joshua Wade. It's time to start the show. Let's hit it. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem Merlot. I am your host, Winnie Schrader, and I started watching Mindhunter, and I'm sure a lot of people have Mindhunter on Netflix, but what really grabbed me out of that series was when they were interviewing Ed Kemper, the FBI specialist who were trying to do the behavioral thing, and they were kind of going around and interviewing different serial killers to kind of find the psyche of a madman. But Ed Kemper, what he decided to do was like dismember, necrophilia. I mean, it was just brutal. And I'm like, I'm wondering if there's a book out there that talks about these deviant sexual crimes that it would just shock you to your core. And I did find a book, and I have our special guest, Doug Fifer, on. He wrote the book, 50 Shades of True Crime. Welcome to the show, Doug.
Thanks, Winnie. Thanks for having me.
Now, you're a retired Alaskan police officer who you specialize in crime scene analysis, and like the deviant sexual crimes, hostage negotiations. So you kind of saw the ugly of the ugliest, right?
I saw the worst of the worst. There's no doubt about it.
So writing this book, what was kind of your goal trying to piece together some of these crimes and let the public know about these kind of deviant, dark, twisted murders? I guess I can't even put words to it because some of it is so appalling to me. But what was kind of your goal for that for the readers?
The goal was, over my career of 25 years in Alaska as a cop, I would work these cases, and some of them, they do blow your mind. They're so traumatic and horrific. But I would often share these stories with other law enforcement officers, with friends, with family, and they would really dig into the details of the sexual deviant crimes. For some reason, that's what they wanted
Mhm.
to know most about. And there's a lot of true crime out there,
Right.
but I thought post-retirement, let's write a book that's a little different twist on true crime that focuses on that deviant sexual nature.
Hmm.
And there's
Yeah.
really not many true crime books out there like it. So that's how the book kind of evolved and why I wrote it. These crimes are, I mean, they're very difficult to read, but this happens, like I say in the book, in everyday USA.
Right. I mean, it could be your neighbor next door doing this stuff inside their house and you wouldn't even know it. So what were kind of some of the cases over your 25-year career that kind of stuck out to you the most, that was kind of like mind blowing? Like, I couldn't even imagine another human being doing this to another human being.
You mentioned necrophilia earlier, which is, for your listeners, that's sex with corpses. That's about
Mhm.
as extreme as it gets. In the book,
Yeah.
I identify three classifications of necrophilia. There's
Okay.
fantasy necrophilia, and in that case, when I was a street cop, I would often talk to women, ladies of the night, prostitutes who worked on the corners. The reason why
Okay.
we talked with them is because they were so good at giving information on crimes, murders, robberies, drug deals.
Yep.
So I would always befriend them and just chat with them about it, and they would give up so much information. They were actually my greatest tool at solving crimes. And
Really?
on one night, and I wasn't really familiar with necrophilia at the time, but she described this John, who was a very successful local businessman in Anchorage, Alaska, and he
Okay.
had a fantasy about necrophilia. So he would pay her to play dead, and then actively have sex with her. And I was a younger cop at the time, and I was really fascinated by that. Like that seemed really strange and weird to me. Then
Yeah.
further in my career, I discovered through our uh, medical lab and where our forensics team, where we actually do autopsies and things like that. We had a mortician that was actually engaging in sex with corpses. That's actually called normal necrophilia. Now I know it sounds odd that it's normal, but that's the way the classifications go. And those are
Yeah.
individuals that seek sex with corpses, like in mortuaries, funeral homes, things like that.
Okay.
And then to further it, and this specifically goes to a lot of serial killers, we get homicidal necrophilia. That's the third
Mm.
classification. And those are killers with the intent of having sex with those bodies. So they kill for that very purpose. So it seems odd to have three classifications. They're extreme. In Alaska, we had a serial killer named Israel Keys. It's a
Yes.
case I worked not as a primary investigator, but I think the entire department for Anchorage worked on this case. He
Yeah.
would kill victims, and he alluded to having sex with the corpses post homicide. As a matter of fact,
Mhm.
we had one victim that it was in February. He had killed an innocent victim and then kept her in his shed for 2 weeks. February is very cold in Alaska. She was frozen. He admitted to getting back home, thawing her out, and then actually having sex with the corpse before disposing of the body. This was 2 weeks later. He went on a Caribbean cruise. Fascinating individual to commit such horrific acts like that. Another
Right.
case I worked is Joshua Wade. He's an Alaska serial killer. He as well had sex with his victims post homicide. Uh, I I was the hostage negotiator that actually negotiated him out. He had taken two
Oh, okay.
hostages when we were searching for him for multiple homicides. So I'm not saying that all serial killers have sex post homicide,
Mhm.
but many of them do. So I'm sure there's a link there somehow.
Yeah, and it seems like it's yeah, that's kind of the pattern, especially these they're so elusive, these serial killers like Israel Keys. I mean, he was very smart about what he did. He thought before he committed the crime. But if anybody wants to learn up on Israel Keys, there's a podcast called Deviant, and they did a whole series on Israel Keys. And to like listen to his audio during his interrogations with the police officers and detectives, he was so nonchalant about it. Like he just basically said, I just did it to see if I could get away with it. And just the lack of humanity and empathy in him was very shocking. And I'm sure Joshua Wade, was that his name?
Joshua Wade. Yeah.
Sure, he was he kind of had that same demeanor as well, or did he kind of show any type of empathy and basically kind of regretted what he did?
Yeah, serial killers, which are sociopaths, they lack all empathy. So Joshua Wade
Hmm.
was very similar to Israel Keys.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, they're very egotistical. They want
Yes.
to be known for their own crimes. They don't want to be related to other serial killers. In fact, they think they're the best serial killer ever. They're quite unique individuals, ones that should never be let out in society again. Joshua
Right.
Wade, a serial killer, he was actually acquitted of an initial murder by an Alaskan jury. Every officer on the department knew he would kill again, and he unfortunately did. So
Oh
they show
gosh.
no remorse at all. The
Yeah.
Israel Keys that we've talked about, he was so unique that although he lived in Alaska, he committed a majority of his homicides outside of Alaska. And the reason
Hmm.
he said for that, because it's very hard to catch him. So he would fly to airports like Chicago. He would bury money, buy a gun locally, bury it there, wait 6 months, fly back, rent a car with
Mhm.
cash, drive across to the East Coast, commit homicides, drive all the way back, fly home. Very hard for investigators to solve those homicides
Right.
because you don't know the people. You don't have any, friends or family telling you about this individual. What he said ultimately is he couldn't control his brain anymore. He knew not to kill where he lived, but he couldn't stop
Mhm.
that urge, and he committed a homicide in Alaska, and that's how we ended up catching him.
Yeah, his demeanor, was just off the charts when I was listening to it, and, knowing Alaska, I mean, you don't hear much about Alaska, but they have the most serial killers per capita because, and what is it about Alaska that makes these people pop a screw loose or something? I mean, it baffles me, like, a place like Alaska, which seems like a very, cold, but just kind of a quiet place to be. Yet you hear these serial killers like Israel Keys or Joshua Wade coming out of Alaska. You're like, what's going on there? Because you're kind of way up there. We don't hear much from you. But what do you think is causing this in your area? Causing serial killers or these you know, psychotic crimes. I mean, I can't really put a word to it. I mean, it's just it baffles me.
I think the extreme cold, the long winters, I mean, you have 8 months of solid winter, very cold
Mhm.
temperatures, it's dark. If you're not from
Yeah.
Alaska, it can certainly be depressing. I think most of our serial killers are transplants, meaning they came to Alaska, and I think another
Okay.
angle of it when we interview them is Alaska's, thought of as very independent, very large, the land of the free, you can come do what you want. There's vast territory, as sick as it sounds, to get rid of bodies. So I think serial killers naturally come to Alaska because they think they can get away with these crimes. It'd be harder to solve in their minds. So they're
Yeah.
thinking through their crimes to try and figure out where they can commit them and get away with them. And Alaska ends up being a spot that they come to. What they don't
Mhm.
know is that we have, very professional police forces, investigators. So they usually don't get away with it, but I think that's part of the draw is you think it's such a large state, and it is. We have a lot of
Yeah.
territory that you're going to get away and you can hide bodies, you can dispose of them. Whereas if you're in downtown New York City, it's going to be difficult. So I think that's a little bit of
Right.
it.
Yeah, it's almost feels like it's a safe haven for serial killers.
Yeah,
Like, it
unfortunately,
just
we don't want them, but we tend to get them.
yeah, and, and I I've noticed, like, a lot of, like, crimes like these do happen in areas that are, long winters. I mean, being in Minnesota, I get it. We have like a 7-month winter usually or 6 month, and they're predicting winter's coming back. Ooh. But yeah, the lack of sunlight. Everybody talks about the winter blues, or people get that winter depression, and I know in Alaska you have that even longer than we do, and I could see how that could really screw with somebody's mind, especially if they're a transplant and they're coming from somewhere and it's a completely different, environment that you're in. So maybe that, they just couldn't adjust to Alaska. You have to adjust to Alaska. And it's unfortunate that it happens there. So now with these crimes, are they mostly men with women, or is it um or are you seeing kind of a good mix of, like, age? Is there a trend that's going on? Is it young people, or is there a mix of, like, old people, children, unfortunately? But, is that what happening in Alaska, or is it just strictly kind of like a man killing a woman?
Yeah, I would think in the extreme deviant crimes, and I've
Uh-huh.
worked hundreds and hundreds of these. It is almost entirely all men. I say almost, because there are a few cases with women, but I would put
Mhm.
it easily at 95% are male perpetrators. There's
Okay.
been very few studies as to why that is, but that's just the facts. So there are a few cases, but predominantly it's men. Age grouping, I wouldn't necessarily say. It could be somebody at 18, it could be somebody at 55. So as far as that, I don't think there's an age grouping where I would cut it off, but it's dominated by men. There's no question.
Okay, so one thing I would like to ask is, you being the police officer, and is the police, like, when you're going out and going on the crime scene and seeing these cases, seeing this, do you guys get any type of therapy yourselves? Because I can't imagine
going to work day in and day out and having to face this and not affect me. Does the police force offer that for you guys? Do you guys get the therapy or anything that you need dealing with these deviant crimes?
So I would say old school, no, but
Okay.
more recently, yes. So that's a good
Okay.
thing. But I think what the police departments do a good job of is selecting those individuals that might be able to handle those type of cases better and be on those
Mhm.
specialty teams that go out and respond to those. So there's a process, interviews, written tests, psychological tests to even get on these teams. So they
Okay.
choose individuals that can probably cope with it a little bit better. I would
Okay.
say in my career, I was very good at doing the job, whatever the hours were, then going home, interacting with my family, kind of turning that off. It was always in the
Okay.
back of your mind. But I think those officers in these extreme deviant cases, last the longest and are okay with themselves. We talked about humor earlier. You know, cops use a lot of that dark humor. It's about
Mhm.
survival. It's not mocking the investigations or anybody. It's
Yeah.
just it's a way for us to relieve some of that tension and pressure. So I don't want to say it didn't affect me. I worked homicide for 4 years, crime scene response.
Mhm.
Literally that quote, "I see dead people." That's all I saw in my mind is dead people because that's all you went to.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a long 4 years, and to this day, I can picture nearly every homicide I ever worked. And remember,
Wow.
we're on these scenes for 20, 30 hours straight. CSI
Right.
is unique where you go in and you find a hair and you solve the crime. That's not how it
Yeah.
works. We're from A to Z. We attend the autopsies on these individuals, the medical examinations. So it's a long, long time on these investigations. But for homicides, it should be because you can't miss anything.
Right. And that's good that you guys are that they do pick and choose kind of the officers that can handle that, because I couldn't imagine just sticking any police officer on a scene like that and not expecting them to just like not freak out, because I know I would. Now, is there any with the um now these crimes, they're like sexual deviant crimes. What kind of things were you seeing at the crime scene that brought you to like, okay, this has to be probably a serial killer? Like, what were the crime scenes like? I mean, was it just a dead body, or are we talking about like all over dismemberment, whatever? What was kind of the crime scenes like when you saw those?
Responding as like a crime scene response member, you would
Mhm.
the initial murder, the violence would be key. So a
Okay.
lot of it is domestic violence, meaning spouse, partner.
Hmm.
That's a vast majority of it. Serial killers, it's hard to determine at first. What we do
Okay.
is you're probably not going to, well, you're certainly not going to determine a serial killer until the second or third victim. The homicides are traditionally similar in nature, right? The tools
Yeah.
that are used, whether it's strangulation, gun, uh, blunt knives, anything, are typically the same. They don't switch up their
Hmm.
patterns. So that's how you'll start to figure out if you have a serial killer. The first one
Okay.
or two homicides would be very difficult to determine that. Not impossible. What we might
Hmm.
have is a serial killer that's killed in an outlying jurisdiction, maybe in a different state that we're aware of. And so we can kind of cross those similarities and get onto it quicker. But that's rare. What I found is, unfortunately, you're going to have multiple homicides before you get on the path of a serial killer.
Okay. Now, the book that you wrote, 50 Shades of True Crime, which I just love the title. It's very perfect for the topic. I love how you inject some humor in there, and you even have some kind of like interactive activities with the reader in the book, which is pretty cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to lighten it up a little bit and add that dark humor that these police officers use so well. And hey, it might help us at the end of this episode feel a little bit mentally stable afterward. But we're going to take a quick break and we'll talk about it. We have Doug Fifer on, who wrote the book 50 Shades of True Crime. We'll see you in a bit.
Did you know that radio just got a little extraterrestrial? That's right, Dave Schrader is back on radio with the Paranormal 360 every Sunday evening, 7 to 9 p.m. Central on WCCO AM 830, an Odyssey station. Just download the Odyssey app and look for the WCCO logo, follow the station, and listen live. That's the Paranormal 360 on WCCO AM 830 and Odyssey station.
Hey, you, come here. Winnie Schrader here from Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot podcast, and I got a little secret to share with you. Are you an author, podcaster, comedian, or an online seller that needs a little help in the digital creation department? Well, I'm your hired gun. From graphics, book covers, press kits, radio tours, merch designs, audio editing, podcasting, and producing. Sure, you can do it all yourself, but all those design tools and stuff to make your promotion pop adds up. CapCut Pro, $8 a month. Canva Pro, $15 a month. ChatGPT 4, $10 a month. Midjourney, $10 a month. Adobe Audition, $23 a month. Plus, you have to do all the editing and all the tedious stuff that comes along with being a digital creator, author, or comedian to help promote yourself. That's where I come in at a lower cost than similar competitors because I know the anxiety and stress that it takes to make your mark in the world on a mac and cheese budget. You'll get one-on-one collaboration with me because this baby belongs to you, and I want to make sure what I'm doing is what you want and how you want it. For more information, visit wsmedia.press. The links are in today's description. Let me do all the legwork for you. That way you can focus on your passion. Again, the website is wsmedia.press, and let's just make some magic together.
Okay, and we're back. I have Doug Fifer, the author of 50 Shades of True Crime, and we're going to kind of lighten it up in the second half of the episode here. He has kind of some interaction that you can interact with the book. Now, is it kind of like games that you kind of created that people can interact in?
It's a little bit the first chapter, and I wanted to kind of wean people into the book because it's really dark on the deviancy. It's called Name
Mhm.
That Crime. So I have,
Okay.
a few crimes in there that will show you either a booking photo, a crime scene photo, and then I'll give you a couple of Alaska statutes, criminal statutes to choose
Okay.
from, and you'll kind of guess what that individual or crime scene, what they did, and then you'll read the
Okay.
story and see how spot on you are. So I want you to kind of look at the crime scene photo and almost, be a profiler in your head and see what you think happens. Read the story and see if you got it right.
Oh, that's cool. So yeah, so you're kind of putting the reader in the mindset of an investigator or a detective, so that so that way they can kind of filter out the emotion part and just look at the facts and piece it together. And yeah, that's a kind of a brilliant way to engage the reader. Now there have an you have another one called The Last Climax. So which one is that one about?
The last climax is the second to last chapter, but that is going to be sexual deviant crimes that are so extreme that
Hmm.
by the chapter's name, it was indeed their last climax. So when I, as an investigator, showed up, they were dead, and it was
Oh,
sex. It was in sexual nature. Now they're all over the spectrum on how they died in sexual
right.
deviancy, but I named the chapter that because nobody survives in that chapter.
Okay. All right. So yeah, that's definitely the last climax. And then what are the teachable tidbits?
Yeah, I say that for the end of the book, just similar to what
Mhm.
you said earlier, that, maybe let's have a letdown and a reprieve and maybe some happy thoughts at the end because the book's pretty hardcore. So those are things I
Yeah.
learned in my law enforcement career that you could actually incorporate in your sex life that are pretty normal that I had no idea about. So for the reader, I put them in there, and these are things that were on crime scenes or investigations. So I put them in there for the reader just for thoughts, whether you would want to incorporate them in your sex life or not, entirely up to them. But it's certainly not to the extreme of the last climax or anything that's critical in nature. It's more of a
Hmm.
fun chapter and quite unique and things that I would have never thought about in your own sex life.
Right. And that kind of turns me into like these snuff films, these snuff porn films. That has like not a huge following, but it's strange to me to know that that is a thing. That is a thing. And it's just, how and people are going to act on their urges. So what can we do to safely, serve that urge. You know what I mean? But yeah, they've had snuff films, and that's been a huge issue too, because these women, they don't know that they're going to die, but they end up killing them on film, and then they sell it as porn, and it's bizarre to me. Now, with the serial killers that you saw in Alaska, were you able to kind of, like, once the serial killer was apprehended, like Israel Keys or Wade, were you able to go into their home and kind of see what was going on in their life, like going through their journals or whatever? Did you find anything that kind of like had a pattern between the two, like what they were doing on their own in the room or something?
Serial killers are the interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
I would say no. What I would tell you about serial killers, all of them that I worked with, they're all meticulously organized,
Mm-hmm.
clean. I found that fascinating because I would
Yeah.
assume that they wouldn't be. Everything in their apartments, houses lined up perfectly. The only thing that would lead them back to the crimes, uh,
Mm-hmm.
they all like to keep little
Yeah.
trophies and trinkets of their victims. It might
Mm-hmm.
be photographs, might be a journal entry, might be a physical piece of jewelry. That was almost always found. But
Okay.
if you were to walk into these individual houses and not know that they were a serial killer, you would guess that they were very clean, upstanding citizens in the community. You would never put two and two together. Other criminals, I go into their houses and they were filthy. They didn't take any
Mm-hmm.
time to tidy it. I mean, as expected, but serial killers were quite unique in that I was always surprised on how organized and clean they were. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so you wouldn't go in there and just find, unless you knew, you wouldn't
Yeah.
find something that related to their crimes. They weren't actively creating those in their own homes and then going out and acting.
Okay. Did Israel Keys, what did he have? Did he keep trophies from his kills?
He did. He had a shed outside his house. He had a girlfriend and a child that lived in the house, and the shed was, I mean, just 15 feet outside in the house. That's where he
Mhm.
kept all his kill equipment, all his trophies. That's where he brought his one Alaska victim to kill.
Mhm.
And this was while his wife and daughter were in the house, just 20 feet
Oh my
away
God.
in the backyard.
That's
So he didn't keep
uh
him in his house, but in his shed. And he was a contractor, construction guy. So the wife
Mhm.
never went in his shed. This was kind of like his man cave work area,
Yeah.
his private area that he locked, of course. But she never had a clue. She really didn't.
Okay. What kind of things were found in there
Well,
for like his trophies?
a lot of the ropes, I mean, blood, hair, things like that from his one
Okay.
victim. He would, you know, when we stopped him or when the law enforcement stopped him in Texas, that's where we ultimately caught him. He had the victim's cell phone, debit card. So they'll keep little keepsakes with them. It's
Mhm.
almost a power trip. I always tell, the book talks about we all think that sex is physical, and it certainly is, but really it's power. These individuals
Yeah.
find power in it. It's not really the physical act. It is, but it's the domination and the power that they get. And this lasts, for normal people, physical lasts, it's temporary. This lasts a long time for these individuals. They keep them in their heads, they replay the crimes, they look at whatever that they've taken, and they relive those occurrences over and over and over again.
Yeah, until they can't fight that urge anymore, and then they go out and kill. Because I've always wondered that serial killers, like, yeah, like you said, a lot of them are clean. They're, tidy. They're very meticulous and things like that, and organized. But to keep something from a crime scene, it seems like it's kind of off. You know what I mean? Like, why would they, if they don't want to get caught, why would they? But yes, it's exactly what you said. They take it, they look at it, and they relive that moment until that urge gets so much that they have to go actually kill again. Just sitting there holding a trinket and reliving it is not enough for them. And I find that bizarre behavior, but we are talking about sociopaths. And so
Yep.
it's like, how do you justify their behavior when to them, that's normal? For us, it's not. And it's just bizarre. So um, now going through and dealing with these type of criminals, what did you have any type of one-on-one interaction with some of these serial killers that you talked with and you kind of were blown back by what they said?
Joshua Wade's one. He's a highly
Okay.
intelligent individual. I would put his IQ at very, very high. Doesn't
Okay.
forget anything, remembers every detail of all of our conversations. I probably have 10 plus hours of interviews with him, covering the
Okay.
gamut of everything. He can remember back to that first minute of that first hour days later, which is hard. I can't even remember all of it, to be honest with you. I have to re-listen
Wow.
and go through it. So it's unique to me that an individual that's so smart commits crimes like this. But you mentioned
Mm.
something that in their mind is perfectly normal, and it is.
Yep.
Killing to Joshua Wade, he could literally bash your skull in and then go get a hamburger from McDonald's. No
Right.
pause. It's just lunchtime, it's time to eat, and never have another thought about that individual. He was that savage of a killer. So that blew me away talking with him. He would
Okay.
describe these homicides in on what he did. He preyed only upon women. He
Okay.
wanted weakness. He felt power in that. But he would describe these crimes to me, and then, matter of fact, we talk about something else that's unrelated, and not even have a hesitation on being sad or have any empathy. So I always found that fascinating. But that's pretty standard with serial killers. They just don't. That's why they kill so much. But
Right.
he blew me away. He was probably good for 10 to 12 additional murders. Unfortunately, he admitted
Wow.
to 5. We could never quite get over the hump to solve the rest of those or get closure for the family. And Israel Keys is the same way. He's probably good for about 11 murders. Both these individuals have subsequently died. Israel
Hmm.
Keys died in a correctional facility in Anchorage. Unfortunately, the jailers gave him a razor blade to shave with, and then he killed himself.
Right.
Joshua Wade was in prison in Indiana. I'd actually had conversations with him post law enforcement as a civilian to try to get him to admit to these other murders. He actually died in the general population about a month ago, probably from an overdose.
Okay. Yeah, and I've noticed that like just listening to Ed Kemper, very similar to Wade. They just want to kill just to see what it would feel like. Like he literally just said he killed his grandma with a shotgun. And he just said, I just wanted to see what it's like to kill my grandma. It's like, okay, you know. And then he eventually went on a spree and killed people. He killed his own mother and he really humiliated her body. And I'm not going to say what he did, but it wasn't pretty. Now, one serial killer that comes to mind that I actually did an episode on, it was one that we had here in Minnesota called the Weepy Voice Killer. I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but he was a very unique serial killer for the fact that once he would murder, he would call 911 to confess to it. And they couldn't, and it, yeah, I'll have to send you the information. I'll send you the link for any, hey, listeners, if you want, you can look at it's the Weepy Voice Killer episode. It's bizarre. And knowing that he was in Minnesota and I've been in the areas where he left these bodies, man, I tell you, it's, ugh. And his voice, oh God, it just gives me shivers. But yeah, and I would love to listen to Wade. Just are there any type of video interviews with him, interrogations like they did with Israel Keys?
Not as many, but the
Okay.
50 Shades of True Crime is my first true crime book. The second book will actually be a book on Joshua Wade as a serial killer. It's actually going to be serial killers in Alaska. He'll be a main portion in there, and a lot of my audio that I have, I'll include whether it's ebook or on my website for listeners to go in and listen to this actual interaction. Because as you say, it kind of puts the hair up on your neck because it's
Yeah.
just so horrific, and they just nonchalant talk about it. I have heard about your killer before. I think an episode was played on Howard Stern on that, I believe. But again,
Okay.
those confessions where they call or they do that, again, we're back to power. They feel
Yep.
power in doing that. They feel control, and that's all they're about. They're very egocentrical. They want everybody to look at them and appreciate, what a great killer they are, even though we think it's horrific. Because the brain just doesn't. They're not wired right. So in their
Right.
mind, that's the right thing to do, and they feel very powerful doing it.
And they've done studies on serial killers' brains to see if there's anything, post once they pass away. And I'm sure they've done like MRI scans and try to do some studies. I think they did it with Gacy, didn't they?
Yep.
And stuff like that. But, yeah, there's something wrong or something's miswired in their mind to be like that, because it's not normal human behavior. So you do, now you have a website. I've been to your website. It's dougpfeiffer.com. I'll have a link for that in today's description, along with your book, 50 Shades of True Crime. And make sure, listeners, you rate and review the book. It helps these books get out more, and, you know, it just helps the author, but, you know, get that book out there. So rate and review it. And so you said you're going to have another book. We'll definitely have to have you back on. Do you have any type of events or book signings that are coming up that people may want to go to if they're in the area?
Yeah, so I started off in Alaska. We've done Fairbanks, which is our northernmost city. It's also one of the
Okay.
coolest places on earth, but that was my first book signing. Juneau's our state capital. I did that last Friday. And then Thursday, I'll do Anchorage locally. And then post Alaska, we'll have a nationwide book signing with the publisher that I work with. And so we'll be in some larger cities. On the website, I post all those that are upcoming. So if any readers want to, you know, if they buy the book, they want to come get it signed, if they want to come get a copy, whatever they like. And, you know, I have a lot of interaction on my website already with this book. It's just a month out, but it's done incredibly well. I think the title helped, but also I think the different twist on that true crime is really interesting to readers. So the feedback's been tremendous. So we'll be working this throughout the next year, and we'll see how the book does. And I'll write a few more for my true crime fans. It'll be fun.
Yeah, look, I loved how you have this already laid out, and I'm definitely going to want to have you back on for your next book. But yeah, this one, I think this is the kind of book where you can curl up on the couch with a glass of wine and just get a little dark and twisty if you want to. But yeah, it's just, I think it's really cool. And you want to know what? As deviant as these crimes are, the act before the crime, that's part of our human psyche. You know what I mean? Everybody has those dark and twisty parts in their brain. So if you want to fill that void, this would be the perfect book for that. Thank you so much, Doug, for coming on today. I'll have a link for your book in today's description. Remember, readers, I just told you, rate and review. Please do that. And your website is dougpfeiffer.com. That's Fifer. Fifer. So, well, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been wonderful and fun, but in a weird way. But yeah, and we'll definitely have to have you back on. And thank you so much for listening, guys. And I'll see you guys next week.
Hey, before we go, I have a special request today. It's about our dear friend Chris Fleming. Chris has been a beacon of light in the paranormal community, sharing his incredible gifts as a medium and a psychic with so many of us. He has given so much of himself, helping people connect with loved ones, offering guidance, and shining light on mysteries of the unknown. But now Chris needs our help. Whether you've been touched by his work or just want to support someone who has dedicated his life to helping others, this is the time to give back. Every little bit counts, whether it's a donation, spreading the word, or sending positive thoughts his way, or even purchasing his art that he has up on Etsy. Let's rally together and show Chris the love and support he's shown us over the years. You'll find all the details in today's program guide, or you can scan the QR code that you see on the screen. Thank you for being such an amazing community, and let's make a difference for Chris. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And until our next case, my armchair detectives, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay aware. I'll see you right here next week on Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot.